Welcome back, everybody. I am Alison Peart. I'm the Vice President of the ICAJ, which is the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Jamaica. And I'm also the Managing Director of A. Peart Advisory Services Limited. I will be your moderator for the rest of the afternoon. First one is Mr. Andre Bello. He's the founder of Atomic Gurus. He's going to talk to us about the impact of blockchain, tech, AI, and get this, the passion economy. I'm really interested to hear what this passion economy is because, we have passion as accountants for a lot of things. Let me tell you a bit about him. Andre founded GET Inc. in 2008. It offers consultancy on the development of peak performance through simplification. You're a real expert when you can simplify things. He started as a zoologist. I started life as a chemist and I don't cook books. I'm excited to hear what this zoologist is going to tell us about the passion economy. He earned his MBA, then built a progressive career in sales, service, and marketing. He made the decision to re-enter the corporate life in 2012. And this was to ensure that when he spoke, it was based on live learning. Some people present and they don't really know, they just talk, they haven't lived it. Well, he has lived it. He wanted to ensure his methods were rooted in practical business applications. This led him to serve as a Caribbean commercial manager for one of the world's most loved brands, Virgin Atlantic, where he served for 8 years, leaving in August 2020. I know Andre because when I moved back from Canada, he was one of the first people that I met and would hang out with. Andre bid me goodbye in Jamaica and told me he was going to conquer the skies at Virgin and move to Barbados. Well, he's conquering the skies. He's left Virgin. He started his own firm and he's now conquering the world. He has written several books in the fields of negotiation, creativity, storytelling. His book entitled The Sword and the Spirit was endorsed by a Harvard professor. Well, he's a TEDx speaker and his main goal is to ensure that learners gain functional tools that can help them succeed from day one. Andre, I'm excited. I want to hear from you. Over to
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that amazing introduction, Alison. Really, really happy to be here with you guys this afternoon. And I want to quickly talk a little bit about the future and really start this. So no, I'm on. Are you hearing me? Yeah, guys. So again, really excited to be here today. We're going to talk about the future and in some ways how the future is going to surprise you. And if you think back to 2020, about the internet, many of us knew about the internet, but had no idea how to use the internet. And as we look at, billionaires on their way to Mars, it might seem like it's out of the way today, but 10 years from now, when we look back, space travel in particular is going to look very, very different. And with that in mind, I wanted to introduce the idea of blockchain, AI, and the passion economy. Fundamentally, because today, many of us know about blockchain, we know about artificial intelligence, and this idea of the passion economy, which is really a migration of the changing nature of work, is something that we're hearing about, but we're not really living it, and it's not part of our daily conversation just yet. All right? So a little bit about me. Alison gave a great introduction. What you'd see is that I work a lot in consulting around leadership and behavioral change and app development and learning. But what you don't see there is anything that sounds like a technology company or a blockchain company. So you might ask yourself, why am I talking to you about blockchain? And I can share with you that when I talk to a lot of CEOs and leaders in companies, they tend to not really have a good understanding of what blockchain is. And in trying to reach out to technical people, very technical people who understand it well, it can sound very, very complex. So we actually have a program that we call blockchain for non-techies because, when you think about where the original white paper came from, unknown person called Satoshi Nakamoto wrote this white paper. And it's something I still recommend you read. It could feel complex complex. So what I want to do today, in just about 30 minutes, is demystify the whole idea of blockchain, artificial intelligence, so that when you go home this weekend, you could explain it to your kids. And if I could do that, I think that you could have a good understanding that you can build on, because it's an essential part of our future. And 5 years from now, it's going to be just normal. You're not going to be even talking about blockchain because it'll be underlying many of the things that you just use every single day. So I want to rename this really as blockchain for the rest of us, which is fundamentally about 99.9%. When we hear blockchain, we say, I know about it, but let me try to dive a little deeper so you get a better understanding. And just as a disclosure to start, I just want to make sure that anything I say here is not to be taken as financial advice. It's really for information purposes only. We're not so much going to talk about currencies because we want to talk about the underlying principle more than anything else. But this is not really meant to be an endorsement of the technology, more just an explanation as to how it works. So to demystify blockchain, I want to go right back to the beginning and talk about ones and zeros, because essentially this is the language of computers. Computers only know zeros and ones. And we call that 0 or 1 a bit. And we call a string of 8 of those bits a byte. So for a computer, it doesn't see numbers. It sees those zeros as 1. It's just simply on or off. So whenever we send anything over a computer, when you're looking at this right now, you're getting this stream in just a stream of zeros and ones, and your computer is translating that into a video, audio, and a picture of me on the screen. So if we think about an internet connection, my internet connection at home is supposed to be 600 megabits per second. And all that really means is 600 million of these zeros and ones are coming through into my house every single second. Supposedly, there's normally only about 100. Now, file sizes are in megabytes. So this cute, very adorable picture of this dog here is 27 megabytes, which means it's about 2.6 million bytes. And if you want to know how many bits that is, you just multiply that by 8, and you get very simply is about 21 million bits, which means that this image is actually, the way the computer sees this is as a string of 21 million zeros and ones that tells it exactly what to do and how to display this on your screen. Now, when you're speaking to computers, they don't understand our numbers. You as accountants, you use these decimal figures, and you're very, very familiar with this decimal system of 0 to 15, so 16 different characters. Computers don't understand that. But you have to translate that into binary, into zeros and ones. So they understand that a 0 is off, 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 a 1 is off, 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 on, and so on. But you could imagine it, when you start to have this language that makes sense to us in decimal, but you run into an issue when you look at the numbers from 10 to 50, because the computer can't translate whether that means 0 or 1 or 10 or 1, 1 or 11. So what they've done is just simply create a simple language where you have from 10, you replace the 10 with A, B, C, D, and so on. So you have 16 characters. And to avoid those double digits, you just start using letters. And for me personally, when I turned 25, I decided I would start saying, instead of turning 26, I'll go 25A, 25B, 25C. And now, I ran out of alphabet, so I might have to start over with 25AA, right? Which is not a problem, which is not good. All right. So what does that have to do with blockchain? When you think about blockchain, I really want to just to really think about, if you wanted to send me $1. So typically, if you want to send me $1, and you were right in front of me, you could actually hand me the dollar. The dollar will leave my possession and join, and you can get, I'll get $1 from you. So it physically is transferred from you to me. But if you look at that dollar, it has a unique serial number on it. So technically, if I want to sell that dollar digitally, I could just take that serial number and email it to you, and I can give you the digital representation of that dollar. But as accountants, immediately you have a problem, because I still have the dollar, I still have the serial number, and therefore the problem of double spending comes in. So how do we solve double spending? We get a third party, C, to keep a record of all these transfers, and therefore we depend on C to basically keep a ledger that dollar's been transferred and can't be transferred again. Right? The problem comes in sometimes when that third party decides who can send a dollar and who could receive a dollar. So, if I want to buy right now a new computer from Apple, and Apple has decided that it won't accept that dollar from me because I'm not in the US and my credit card is not a US credit card. And therefore that transaction starts to become controlled by that intermediary. So the whole idea behind blockchain was being able to, how can we find a system that removes that third party and really use a peer-to-peer network as a public trustable ledger of the fact that I send that dollar to prevent that double spending. And when we look at that little conversation I had with you about zeros and ones, I want to just really show why it's a very important part of this conversation. So now we're going to jump into a little technical side of it. So what has happened is that you have this ledger which just says this transaction happened. And basically you want to sign back that transaction happened. And you do that by creating what you call a hash. Let's talk about what a hash is, because you see this hash has a bunch of figures on the bottom of the screen. And those are actually 64 of those hexadecimal characters that I mentioned earlier on. So even when you have nothing, no data, it's represented by 64 characters. Each of those characters representing 4 on and off states, zeros and ones. So if I type my name inside there, I say Andre Bello, you would see that hash changes. And now that hash starting with BBFF is a verification, a signature that information is correct, that I typed in Andre Bello. So if we want to break that down, we use what you call a SHA-256 algorithm, which is very simply taking my name and signing it using an algorithm of 64 characters, where each of these characters now translates into 4 of those bits. And now the computer can understand that. So that's why you get a 256, because it's 64 characters by 4 bits. Now, so let's look at what a block looks like. You would notice here that there's no data. There's a block. This is the first block. Let's call this the Genesis block. Right? There's something called a nonce, which stands for a number used once. And then there's data. And here there's no data. And this is basically in the hash, you'd see that by having that little red area there, it's 4 zeros. And 4 zeros for this is a signature to verify this is a verified signed transaction, that this is the initial piece of information in this block. So suppose I typed in my name, Andre Bello. What you would see is now that little area there is not verified because there's been a change to that data, so it's not signed. And it is not considered to be verified because it doesn't start with, in this case, 4 zeros. So what do I do to get that signed? Well, you notice that little button there that says mine. What I do is I click on that button, right? Sorry, before I click on that button, I could actually try to guess this. I could actually figure this out. I could say, okay, how can I change this number on top to continually change stuff from 1, then to 2? Doesn't work. You notice the number at the bottom changing to 3, to 4, to 5. And again, I could go on over and over and find a number that when added to the data I have, brings this hash back to start with 4 zeros, which is the way you sign the data that I have as verified. And that'll take me forever. So instead, what I do is I mine it. And now we start to understand a little bit about, when you talk about blockchain mining, what is really happening is that this is what you call a proof of work, so that there's data, and you want to basically sign that data off as verified. So you mine it using CPU, using computers. And therefore, this is now a signed version of data that can be added to the blockchain. So Andre Bello is the data, and we put it inside there. Yeah. So if we start looking now at a string of blocks, which really is a blockchain, what you'll start to see is that in block number 1, I have Andre Bello has $100. Block number 2, Andre has 150, Andre Bello has 160. And at the bottom, what you would notice is that you have a starting hash, then you have a hash for this block, and that block goes on to the second block. So this previous block is identical to the block before. And these nonces these have all been mined blocks, so that these nonces have been mined, so that these are all signed blocks that basically are a ledger of all the transactions that Andre has taken. So you have blocks, and they're joined together by this chain of hashes, which are just really generated by this algorithm that says this is signed and verified that Andre has $100 and so on. So as you start to move down the blockchain, you start to recognize if I have 5 blocks that go from Andre has 100 all the way down to Andre has $180 at the end, you would see that all these hashes are strung together with the final block ending in 825A. So I know that that is a ledger that is out there that's been verified through this mining process by looking for the nonce that brings this number to be 4 zeros that I can verify it. Now, why is that important? If we look at a scenario where I wanted to go in and make a change to a previous block. So in block number 4, I decided I wanted to change that and say, I didn't have $170. I wanted to go after the fact and change that to I had $175. What happens is that now you see that it's not signed, it's just released. It doesn't start with 4 zeros, and it doesn't start with 4 zeros in the previous one. And the final block now has a problem. So I now have to go remine this, right, to try and bring it back to re-sign it. And this is what you call, again, the proof of work. You go through the mining process and end up with 4 zeros again, and it's taking a while because it's looking for a number. And it says, okay, if I change the nonce to this new number, 64623, it'll be mine and I can mine it all the way. But now I don't end with 825. And really, this is where having that same ledger be distributed among the network really comes into play, because now, although I've made that change and I've tried to cheat the system by changing it in one blockchain and remining it, it actually doesn't match up with the other distributed versions of that ledger. And therefore, this, because it's basically a democracy, this chain will be thrown out because it doesn't match. And if you start to think about the usefulness of this, you start to see that blockchain has a couple of things that makes it very, very useful to be a trusted source of transactions that are time-stamped to prevent this idea of double spending. So we can here see that blockchain is sequential. It happens one transaction is added, right? It's added in sequence and timestamp. It's distributed and is immutable. If you try to change it, it will actually not line up with the distribution and it'll be thrown out. The only way you can do that is if you have enough computing power to have 51% and you call it a 51% attack, so that you will actually find that you can override the system, which is virtually impossible to do for a large blockchain like Bitcoin. But it has happened in the past with smaller blockchains. So what does that mean to you and your industry? Well, when you start looking at things like audits and verifications and looking at paper trails, you will find that you have in blockchain a total transformation of some of the key activities that you need to perform, given that you have this ledger that is distributed globally, and anybody who tries to change it, it'll basically be thrown out if it does not match with this distributed version of it. And you find that you'll have something that's much more trustworthy and much more subject to fraud or to changes, or that you would have to spend much less time auditing. But I want to actually jump into that, because even if you have a transaction that is considered to be, you have a record of it, is the transaction still fraudulent or not, right? And we want to actually just look a little bit into some of the rules that you can apply AI, to actually try to identify patterns through machine learning. And I make reference to Benford's law, which some of you already know quite well. And it's just really, if I were to ask all the participants in this room what your annual salary is, if I look at a large number, maybe not in this room, but maybe all the participants or everybody in the Caribbean, I look at all salaries, you would expect that the first significant number would have an equal chance of appearing. So you'd say that one might have an 11% chance, 2 11% chance, because things are supposed to be random. And what you find, if you have a rule that you can put into an artificial intelligence system, you find that Benford's law said that's not actually true. That in fact, if you look at a large number of data like that in certain conditions, that the first digit, significant digit, has a 30% chance of being a 1, and a 2, 17.6%, and so on, all the way down. So that when you're looking at large amounts of data, you're able to see that if it doesn't hold to this rule, then maybe something's going on here. We have a case here of an Arizona state treasurer in 1992, who, when they looked at the data of payments he was making to one supplier, you start to recognize a pattern, and very quickly you could see it doesn't it doesn't conform to Benford's law. There are way too many nines, way too many eights, and way too few ones. Now, what does that mean? It means that it doesn't mean that there's anything fraudulent going on, but it just means that you've set in some sort of learning that AI is now going to identify for you and flag, and it now is something that you can check to see, what was really going on here. And in this case, it was fraud, and you might be able to recognize that one of the reasons why all the numbers start with 92, 90, 90, all in the 90s is probably because he was trying to avoid a $100,000 trigger. So that things like this human behavior, humans tend to think not in Benford Law's terms, but in terms of what they think random is, but patterns evolve. So what you find is that you have this ability to use artificial intelligence, and that will improve over time. So you can set rules based on observations. And then basically your job now is to basically say, okay, what do we do? What decisions do we make out of these things that artificial intelligence can reveal to us? I want to also just talk a little bit about how this is going to explode as we go forward. Because if we think about computing as these zeros and ones, quantum computing is going to change that totally, because it's no longer going to be just zeros and ones. It's going to be 0 and 1 and every state in between zeros and ones. And all you need to know about that is that computing power is going to make artificial intelligence totally, much more powerful. And in 10 years, much more ubiquitous. You'll find that we have the ability to make, computations and calculations based on observed data in a much more powerful way. Right? So if we think about just blockchain and artificial intelligence right now, we're on the verge of a major disruption in the world. And although we had some linear growth over the last 10 years, expect that to change to exponential growth in 5 to 10 years going forward. And the World Economic Forum has said, look, there's a disruption coming through, and it's a double whammy. One is one that we all know, we're now supposedly or seemingly at the end of the disruptions caused by the global pandemic of COVID. On the other hand, we talked about artificial intelligence, and we're starting to see job displacement in this area. And I wanted to focus in particular in this area, because what it's going to mean is that there's lots of tasks, and you have a good idea. When I talk about blockchain and being a distributed ledger, what that means and the implication for your industry, I think you could have a really good idea of what those implications are, right? But you start looking at all sorts of jobs and what the landscape looks like over the next, between now and 2025, is not that jobs will decrease, over time. You'll have an increase in jobs, but the landscape is going to change. So if we start looking at the jobs that make up the decreasing landscape, and I want to just highlight that number 3 and number 4, starts to talk about accounting, bookkeeping, payroll clerks, right? Accountants and auditors. And you start to understand a little bit why, and it's not really necessarily a bad sign for your profession. What it means is your profession has to really adapt into trying to figure out when these things become automated, how can you then bring your value add up to 30,000 feet, right? So I have to use the airline industry here, because you're now going to be dealing with, strategic conversations and use the insights gained from the data to make business decisions. And therefore, when I look at the number one element of growing job demand, being able to be a data analyst and understand data much more clearly is something that is going to be a major part of every industry, but especially yours. If we look at what Google has done, Google has actually said, look, we have certain skill sets that we're looking for. And we don't care about university degrees. We think that data analytics is one of the major skill sets that we're going to need going forward. And I encourage almost any young person who will listen to me recently, talk about it, start getting into project management, data analytics, user interface, because these are things that are going to play a role whatever career you end up in. And in accounting, being able to understand, make sense of data is really going to be a much more important element of your daily life. So you look at what Google is doing, and on Coursera, in about 6 months, you can get for under $300 probably certified in their data analytics certificate. And the importance of that is really because There are lots of elements that are around bookkeeping and auditing that are going to become automated. And fundamentally, the value add is really being able to help make business decisions. And that's really going to be very important in the future. So we talk about this passion economy. So we talk, when we look at the possibility of job displacement, I'm doing some work right now with some guys out of Trinidad, Anya Youngchi and Julie Avey from Massey. And they're basically trying to figure out, how do we prepare people who are emerging from traditional work into this passion economy for the future? And what we start to see when we talk to people who are actually looking at changing the way they work, whether they're going to work remotely and provide professional services as gig workers, or they're going to get into some sort of entrepreneurship, we see that there's a real demand now for following your dreams, following your passion, and doing what it is you think that really that you love doing on a daily basis while still being successful. And we've done some research on their behalf to really figure out, what's next for people in their current jobs. Whether they're displaced or not, what do you think is next? After your current job, what's next for you? And what's the main reason for your response? What I can tell you is that a lot of them are looking for help, and help in understanding, setting up their business, their financial elements of their business. They don't understand, profit and loss. They can't, they tend to just, earn money, spend money. They're driven by their product. They're driven by their passion. And this sort of financial advice they need for starting up is extremely important. And, I use the example of a Caribbean business now trying to set up, a payment system. And it's so easy, if you're in the US, you just, in 10 minutes, you can have a Stripe account set up. But for Caribbean, entrepreneurs, following this passion economy, it's not very easy, right? If you want to even talk about crypto, and blockchain, if I wanted to, I just went on to MoonPay just to see, can I get involved in crypto? Can I start, making an investment? And you see on the right-hand side there, we're sorry, MoonPay is not supported in your region. So we have this problem, and we have this problem where the basic tools that a lot of businesses internationally have to get into following your passion aren't available. And I'm seeing, with my clients, a movement towards saying, should we now form a company in the United States, right? And there are many options to do this. The first one is Atlas by Stripe, and now First Base, which makes it very, very easy. But I'll tell you, if you click on that Get Started button, the first thing that you see is to choose a company type. And I had a client who actually did this and got stuck at this page, did not understand the implication of what an LLC was versus a C corporation. So what we're seeing here is three things really. We're seeing where the people are driven to follow their passion. And it could be people even in the accounting industry who decide, look, I want to offer my service, right? And then on the other side, what you have is you have people who are trying to start a business, but are not clear on how to do it financially, how to manage revenue, cash flows, how to manage burn. And therefore, what we are seeing here is a real demand, and the two sides of the coin where, on one hand, you might find people in the financial services industry who want to get into the gig economy and start actually offering their services more as a professional service rather than as a job. On the other hand, we see a lot of people who are actually moving into their own companies and need those professional services to support their passion and drive their companies to help them make basic decisions. So what I really want you to take away from this keynote is three things really. One, I want you to just think about blockchain as something that I really try to share just a very little piece of it. And I know there was a lot to share in a very small period of time, but I want you to understand that it is with us. It is a different way of doing things, not just about currency, but you'll start to see it being applied across software, across services, across the internet in many, many different ways, just because the nature of it, right? It's distributed, there's no third party controlling it. So you'll start to see more and more in that space. The second is AI is going to play a role in taking out some of the menial tasks in your industry. And your role is to start adding more value-added strategic services around business planning. And the third is that some of the people who are going to need that business planning are going to be small entrepreneurs who are removing themselves from or being displaced from traditional work and moving into this passion economy where they're now following their dreams. And whether it's creating a product or offering a service, But the last thing that they understand is what are the financial implications of that move. And being able to provide support for them is going to become more and more important as time goes on. So I talk about, I started off with the thing about going to Mars. And I really want to end by saying that this idea of going to Mars, what I want you to do is to sort of wrap your head around blockchain and artificial intelligence, just so that when this time comes, no matter what the case is, that you are, ready to get a gig on Mars. And with this domain name, Gig on Mars, I want to encourage you, if you want to click on it and take part in that nudge survey, there are two things. One, you could get a sense of the questions that we are asking entrepreneurs about what's next for them. You might want to fill it out yourself. But the second part of the survey is to allow you to add yourself to a database. If you feel that you want to be part of that passion economy by providing your services to this group of entrepreneurs that are coming up now and really need help in this space. So with that, I want to thank you very much. I hope you have enough to take home and to explain this to your kids this afternoon. All right, thank you.
Well, thank you, Andre. We're leaving your Zoom room. Everybody saw that? He has a Zoom room, all set up. I hope we all have a Zoom room because, as he said, we have to be ready to go to Mars.